6 major stakeholders in the business, need to treat them equally. People, profit, planet, not just profit, okay? And as I did that and started to apply that, and it's counterintuitive because if you start paying your employees more than you have to, you're losing profit, right? But the thing that changed was the productivity went through the roof. And when I started looking after customers, they told everybody, and it swelled and so on and so on.
Hey, welcome back to the Kingdom Builders Academy podcast. We're so excited to have you with us today. In the house, we have a very special guest, the $5 billion man, kingdom man of God, Dave Hodgson is with us. So Dave, thank you for being here. I want to just get us started with this first question. Will you just tell us a little bit of background on yourself, how you came to Christ, how you ended up building this $5 billion business across 33 companies? Will you just tell us a little bit about you and your testimony?
Yeah, sure. All right. So I grew up in Africa in a country called Rhodesia, which is now called Zimbabwe. And, I went to school in South Africa. Rhodesia wasn't an apartheid nation. South Africa was. I grew up as a white, black kid. All my mates were black kids. So I learned the bush. I learned the customs, and I lived with the black people a lot. And then went to South Africa to boarding school. Got my brains beaten out for mixing with the black kids who ran away because they weren't allowed to talk to white kids. So I had first-hand experience of proper apartheid or legalized apartheid and so on. Eventually, when I left school, I was brought back to Rhodesia and there was a war going on. All of our neighbors had declared war on us, and we fought that war for 14 years. I fought it for 10 years. I joined the SAS, the Special Air Service, which is a Special Forces unit. I fought in the SAS for 4 years, and then I joined a unit called the Zulu Scouts, which is also a Special Forces unit. The difference between the two, the SAS, we fight behind enemy lines, blowing things up and all that sort of stuff and having fun. But in the Zulu Scouts, I was actually trained to become a terrorist, and I fought as a terrorist, infiltrated their ranks. So it's very different. You had to be almost an indigenous person to do that, which I was, just obviously still European descent. Anyway, I did that for another 4 years. Then I was a mercenary for 2 years. And then eventually, when the war ended, I started business. I had a couple of mines in the new Zimbabwe, and I came to Australia. They formed the new socialist government, formed a mineral marketing board, and forced us to sell our minerals to the government, dropped the price, upped the wages, and put us out of business intentionally overnight. Okay, so I came to Australia on holiday, just a 3-month holiday, smuggled out a whole lot of sapphires. I was mining sapphires in a camera in order to see if I could find an export market for the mines. While I was here in Australia for that 3-month trip, I was accused of somebody blew up a squadron of British Hawk jets at Thornhill Air Base, which was right on a common border with my parents' farm. I was there when they were blown up, but when I was here in Australia for that 3-month trip, they accused me of doing it because I was one of the last guys left in the country that used to do that as a day job. I didn't do it, by the way, so don't look at me like that. But at the end of the day, I couldn't go back. They were waiting at the airport to hang me. My mother phoned me. She'd been interrogated, and she said, "You can't come back. They're waiting." So I never went back. And my wife and kids went back to Johannesburg in South Africa, or my wife went back to pick up the kids. I had to get on the plane to fly back to Zim, but it stopped in Singapore. And I jumped off and said, can I come in as a tourist? They let me in for 2 weeks. I got a job as a commercial diver. I actually lied my way into the job because I never knew anything about saturation diving, but I became a saturation diver for the next 4 years in Singapore. Eventually got my wife and kids out after a year. We lived in Singapore and eventually got into Australia in about 1985. And it was in Perth in Western Australia that I got saved. My wife was a Christian. I wasn't, but I used to go to church with her because I used to had a motorcycle business. I used to sell motorcycles to the Christians. They were easy to sell bikes to. So that was why I went to church, to make money. Oh dear. But anyway, I never wanted to get saved. I didn't believe what was being taught, and I couldn't see the rest of the Christians practicing what was being taught. So I didn't want to be saved. But always the pastor at altar calls, he was always eyeing me out, and I always looked away and I get a little squeeze on the hand from my wife, but I didn't want to be saved. Anyway, one day Reinhard Bonker was coming to Perth, and he was doing crusades in the Perth Entertainment Centre, huge auditorium, 6,000 people. And my wife, Merlene, was hounding me to come. She said, please come. You'll identify with him. He's from Africa and all this sort of stuff. She just wanted me to get saved. Anyway, I fought for 2 weeks and eventually she wore me down. And I said, okay, we go. We're not going in a company car. I don't want anybody in the motorcycle fraternity to see me mixing with you limp-wristed Christians. When we go in last. We sit by the door, and when the lights come on, we make swastikas out of there and we're gone. And she said, I don't care. I just want you to come. So we did exactly that. We went in last. We sat right at the top and right by the door so we could get out quickly. And Reinhardt was down there on the stage. He can't see anything. It's just one thing in his eye and one light. He couldn't see anything. And ultimately, he just stopped after about 20 minutes. He just stopped in the middle of his talk. And he looked straight up the aisle and he pointed up exactly where I was sitting. And he said, German accent, he said, up there. He said, there's a young executive in the motor industry. So I had a motorcycle business that was growing big, it was quite big. And I owned it. I was the executive. He said, there's a young executive in the motor industry. He said, you're here under duress tonight. And he said, the Lord has knocked on your door many times. And this could be the last time. So come. And he's a bossy dude, he wanted me, hurry up, you're interrupting my service. And I looked at my wife and I said, geez, do you think he's talking about me? And she said, well, what do you think? And I said, I think it's a setup. I think one of your disciples is down there from your church. And she said, you better go, he's getting cross. So I ran down the aisle, everyone stands up clapping, up down there, and I went down there and there was nobody from Merlin's church. It was all his disciples from Africa. And that's how I got saved. He led me to the Lord and sent me out the back for counseling.
Wow.
And so that's a long story of how I became a Christian.
That's so cool. Yeah, I did not know that story about Reinhard in one of his conferences. That's really cool. I mean, one of the things that really sticks out to me, Dave, from our last conversation that we won't get into as much today because I want to pivot to some new stuff to talk about, but just how your life experience prepares you for your calling, right? Like life experience is kind of like God's training for your assignment. And maybe you could just kind of, reinforce that point quickly for just a minute for people, because, every time we unpack your story, there's like another layer of like the turmoil and the challenges and the desert seasons that you had to go through. And I just know that for so many of our students and so many of the people that we work with, that's kind of part of the equation. It's part of the equation to getting where God has called you, is going through some of those like really trying times. And I just know, Dave, you've probably experienced that more than most of us, I would say, more than most of us. And, God's really elevated you to a higher place, at least in the, business and financial world, to really a very high place. So maybe you could just, make any thoughts you have on that really quick before we pivot into some of this other stuff.
Yeah, certainly, Zach. So you're right. My life has been a whole history of adversity from the age of 4 years old, sent to boarding school across 4 countries on a train, took 10 days each way in each direction, unescorted, 4 years old, thousands of kilometers. And this is in the 1950s and 60s. There was a war on, and white kids were not popular in some of those black African countries that we had to go through, and so on. So all of the above, and then throughout the Rhodesian War, and so on, being stateless in Singapore, all the different things that happen. But, it is training for our assignments. And my assignment, which I received from the Lord in 2011, is to create the world's first modern-day sheep nation as a prototype for the rest of the world to follow. So this is not a Christianese allegorical thing. This is a physical thing on the ground. Jesus is not coming back until there are sheep nations on earth, right? So there better be some. And at the moment, there aren't. So if I'm going to do that as an assignment, I'm going to take on directly the kingdom of Babylon, And this has never been done for 3,000 years. The last person to try was King Solomon in the 10th century BC. So here's, me, who am I? To take on the whole kingdom of Babylon and try to get greed out of the business world, greed and self-centeredness, which is the root of all evil, out of the business world. I'm going to get a massive backlash from the kingdom of Babylon. Trumpian backlash, lawfare, everything you can think of. It's manifest. You can see it. It's good that Trump went through everything he did to get to his real assignment, which is the second presidency. That's his real assignment. Well, it's the same gig here. It's never stopped since I was 4 years old. And from the day we launched our assignment, which was 2013, the Lord showed me in 2011, launched in 2013, it has never stopped. We launched a vision for the nation. The backlash, the national backlash has been immense. But God trained me for that. You can't get better training than the SAS and the Selous Scouts. These are famous units throughout the world in military history, very famous. But the adversity you go through just to get in, and then 10 years of war every day, we're being invaded, different kind of war to when you're fighting overseas, right? We were being invaded. And so all of that adversity sets me up so that today, we're being audited by the tax office going back 23 years. My lawyers, and we're not crooks, right? We've never lost anyone's money. We've always paid our tax. And my lawyers have said this is unprecedented in Australian corporate history. Okay. So, and also the corporate regulators, ASIC, have lodged 44 allegations against me. Yet we have the best track record of funds management the nation has ever seen. Never lost a cent. Okay. So all of this going on all the time because we are ousting Babylon. We are literally, the ASP movement, All Shall Prosper movement, is the actual operational side of KI, Kingdom Initiatives, which I head up, is taking ground here properly to start occupying culture through unity, winning the hearts and minds of our adversaries to come to the kingdom of God, but by providing solutions to their needs without compromising our values. Okay. It's a massive assignment. I better know how to face adversity. So that's the answer to that question.
Yeah, they go hand in hand, the assignment and the adversity. And it seems to me there's a real parallel that the greater the assignment, the greater the adversity, because it's just preparing.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Let me last question before I jump into this, the thing I'm really excited to talk about around kingdom capitalism, holistic capitalism. What is it that you do in those seasons? Like, is it a mindset? Do you have a practice? Like, how have you come to conquer adversity?
Yeah. So, you get to the stage, Zach, where you just stand. Okay. Ephesians 6, you've done everything that you know you've got to do. And when you know your assignment, like I'm 100% committed, convinced and committed to my assignment. So there's no doubt that I know what I have to do. And I also know that the favor of God comes with the assignment, not with the individual, because I never had the favor of God until I started the assignment. So as soon as I did, the favor came, and then the supernatural multiplication came, which confirmed everything. It's beyond me to have a $5 billion company. I'm a $2 million man, max. That's what it used to be before I started the assignment. So I know then that as the adversity grows and grows, my job is to stand. And to stand doesn't mean to go and stand in the corner and look at the wall, right? To stand is to continue the assignment. So it's so important for business people because you're in there confronting Babylon, all of you, but most people don't know. Most Christians don't know, and they're actually part of the problem by dealing with working in profit-driven capitalism. But the point is, when the adversity comes, you're ruffling feathers in hell. On our website, we have a lesson called MEGAREF. It actually covers about 8 lessons. MEGAREF is an acronym for the 7 mountains. And when you're facing adversity and you don't know why, because you think, okay, I'm doing everything right. I'm not, cheating on my wife. I'm not ripping anybody off, and I'm not punching people's lights out, and all sorts of things. Why is there so much adversity? You can measure yourself against each of the 7M on that MEGAREF, and you will find the answer. And most of the time, when you find that you can't, all your sin is confessed, and you're just operating, and you're doing your assignment, it's because you're ruffling feathers in hell, and there's a massive backlash, and you must then stand like Trump stood. You get shot in their ear and everything, and it's fight, let's fight, that kind of gig. And it's the same with all of us normal people. Must stand and just wear it. But stand means to continue. Don't stop the assignment, because that's why there's an assault. That's why the devil comes against you.
Yeah, so powerful. Really good word. Thank you for sharing that, Dave. Stand. Yeah, and that means to continue the assignment, not to stand in the corner. That's so good. All right, let's jump into this. So you have in a framework, like an economic framework called holistic capitalism, which is in effect applied biblical economics. And the Lord has used you to build this multi-billion-dollar business as proof of this model. And this is being taught all over the world, even in secular universities. Will you just bring that message to us and explain how this came about and how it all works?
Yeah, certainly. So I was in Rhodesia, right? And Rhodesia was the breadbasket of Africa. It literally was a very small country, but it was so prosperous. There was no apartheid and so on. And it fed all the countries around it and etc. But there was a war of independence because it was still a minority government, okay? Eventually, we were squashed, but we won the war. We won almost every battle, but we lost the first election. And it was forced that way by the British, and the Americans combined against us. But ultimately, it was taken over by Robert Mugabe and his ZANU-PF party. Now, I don't care who's black or white or anything, because, I grew up with the black people. I treat everyone equally. But he was so corrupt, and it's rampant throughout Africa, overt corruption. And he was so corrupt, he proceeded to plunder the nation, and he became one of the top 10 richest men in the world. And the people of Zimbabwe, it was Rhodesia, became Zimbabwe, began to starve because he took all the wealth, okay? And eventually, within about 5 years, Zimbabwe went from the breadbasket of Africa to the basket case of Africa, economically, socially, crime, everything. Unemployment was up in the 80s, 80%, etc. And today it's one of the poorest countries in the world. And yet, resourcefully, with all the resources, it's one of the wealthiest, okay? Just corruption and greed. So when I eventually got into Australia, I thought, we're in heaven. This is a first world country, no corruption. I can bring up my kids and settle in here. I'm going to love it. Well, within 6 weeks, I realized this place was as corrupt as Zimbabwe, but it was just much more sophisticated and covert. It wasn't in your face. But I soon picked the trends and got ripped off everywhere I turned by Aussies, and not just because they're Aussies, it was a multicultural country, but it was just corrupt. And eventually I sat down thinking, what on earth is this? How on earth do we ever fix this thing called greed? Anyway, I became a Christian, as I said, through Reinhardt, and then I started to pay attention at church, and I started to listen to what was being preached and taught. And I looked at my new Christian friends, but I never saw any of them practicing what we were taught. And I asked them, the blokes mainly in business, the guys, how does this work? What do we do on Monday? And they said, no, that's from, an agricultural society back in the days of, Moses and the boys, and all that stuff. And I thought, well, really? So what's the point of learning it? And so why should we even bother? Anyway, I thought about it. And I thought, no, this place is so corrupt. It's going to collapse, going to implode ultimately like Zimbabwe. So I started to try to apply these principles. And when I looked at it carefully, I realized, okay, traditionally there are 6 major stakeholders in any business. And I needed to the Bible was teaching me that I needed to actually treat them all equally, okay? So in other words, I'm going to treat I'm not just looking after my interest as the shareholder, as the owner of the company, but I need to look after the employees, the customers, the supply chain, the community, and the environment as well. So 6 major stakeholders in the business, need to treat them equally. People, profit, planet, not just profit, okay? And as I did that and started to apply that, and it's counterintuitive, because if you start paying your employees more than you have to, you're losing profit, right? But the thing that changed was the productivity went through the roof. And when I started looking after the customers, they told everybody, and it swelled and so on and so on. And here's just a quick example how it started. It was a motorcycle business, and I was selling it, Ducatis and Cagiva and Moto Guzzi and Liberta, all the Italian bikes, very upmarket. So I had a big sales floor, and then we had the workshop at the back. And I could hear, my office was in between, and I could hear the mechanics talking in the back, and they hated me. They absolutely hated me, and mainly because they thought I was a refugee that had come in and now taken over the management, and I was their boss. Tall puppy syndrome. So I thought about this in the biblical context that I was starting to understand. I called them in one by one, and I said, dude, what is it that you actually want out of life and out of this business working here? Do you want more pay? And I was paying them much more than the award rate because they were specialized Italian motor mechanics. And if I lost them, I got to send people to Italy to train. So I was really looking after them anyway. And I said, what is it that you actually want? Do you want shares in the company? Do you want to change your job and come up higher in management? What is it? And one by one, I did this. And to my absolute amazement, they all had the same issue. They all wanted to be known as the best mechanic in the industry. their job was their identity. And I just looked and thought, gee, that's fickle. I didn't say that, but I just thought, wow, if your identity is in your job, what happens if you lose your job, But at the end of the day, I thought, okay, if that's the case and they all wanted the same thing, I called them all in. They didn't want more money. They were already getting a lot. And they said, we want to be this. So I said, okay, guys, here's what we're going to do. We're going to import the fastest Ducati that's ever been built on the world. We're then going to give it to you guys, and you specialist mechanics tell me what you want done. We'll work out the budget. We're going to make it lighter and faster, and then we're going to go out to the Wanneroo racetrack. We're going to put an A-grade rider, and we're going to start winning the Thunderbike series, which is all the European bikes. And if we're any good, we'll start winning the F1s, is what it was called in those days, which is take on the Japanese bikes. Anyway, they said, would you do that? I said, yeah, let's do it. So we did it, okay? And these guys, the hatred of me turned into like a love, almost a bro kind of love. And they stayed back and they worked on the bike every night. And I said to them, you guys, you finish the day job and then you can work on the bike. And their wives and kids came and they all sat in the workshop. They smoked their wonder weed and made this bike go fast. And then we started winning the Thunderbike series and they started to become famous. And then we took on their F1s, which is the Japanese bikes where everybody was racing and no European bike had beaten them. We were the first in the nation ever to beat the Japanese bikes, and we began to flog them, and my mechanics became famous. They were in magazines all over the world, and they were so happy. And the business, it just went from I bought that business for $60,000 plus a Mercedes-Benz. It became a $2 million business in the second financial year because of that. It was only turning over 60 grand. But because of that, we started to really, really prosper. And that was biblical economics working, because I was going past just profit for me, and now I was looking after the employees. So I did it to the rest of the stakeholders. And when I looked at this, I thought, well, hang on, we can do this in a business, but then I'm competing in the marketplace under profit-driven capitalism to put my competition out of work. And I thought about it. What if the competition is actually sitting next to me in church on Sundays, but on Mondays I'm trying to steal all their market share? And, a few weeks later, this is me thinking in church, the Lord confirmed this, because I went on an enduro rally, which is, riding motorcycles in the bush, and hundreds of people come and all the motorcycle dealers are there, and you get paired up with people. And I got paired up with a guy and his family parked next to ours, and we all got paired up, and we had to race all day against each other. And this bloke was fast and he was good, and we became best mates. And in one day, and we got back that evening, started having a drink. And it turns out he's my opposition. And I'd never actually met him. I knew him and we were tearing each other apart in business and trying to take each other's business. But when I realized that he was my opposition, we sat there looking at each other and go, oh my gosh. And he had 3 little girls and a boy, and I had my kids. And we just thought, why are we trying to tear each other apart? And so I thought about it, and I went back to see him. And I said, there's a 7th stakeholder in my business that economics doesn't cover. And it's you, my opposition, my competition. You need to be my fraternity. And he said, I don't trust you, South Africans. And I said, well, he was a Kiwi. And I said, New Zealander. And anyway, we'd argued about being Rhodesian or South African. But at the end of the day, he said, I don't trust you, but I'll watch you. And he said, I'll work with you. I said to him, we just need to niche. We don't take each other's market share. We grow a bigger market. And he agreed. So we did. And we both prospered. And then the whole industry rose with the tide of prosperity. And we said, okay, if this can work at a business level, it's the Bible, 100%, right? This is applied biblical economics. It can, and if we can do it at a sector level, why can't we do it at a national level and then create universal prosperity? We can create wealth without creating poverty, which is the biblical way, wipe out capitalism, call it holistic capitalism, or capitalism is what I dubbed it, our people, profit, planet, and then we can create a modern day sheep nation. Now, I hadn't had that assignment, didn't get that till 2011. This was 1987, but it was seeds were sown by the Lord that day. So ever since then, I built our business on that theory that there are 7 stakeholders and they must all prosper. And if we do that, we all rise with the tide of prosperity, and prosperity and wealth becomes infinite. Wealth is actually infinite, but as soon as you centralize it, which is what capitalism does, it becomes finite, and you've got it all and no one else has got any. That's the extreme, of course, but it's what happens all the time. And that's why we have all different poor people everywhere. Everyone's creating wealth at the expense of everyone else. If you do it God's way, which most Christians don't, which is why he stands them down in business and never go above the threshold, then you do it his way, wealth becomes infinite, which is how he made the planet. Okay?
Beautiful, beautiful. There's so much to dive into there, Dave. I mean, that's a great introduction, honestly, to biblical economics and this holistic capitalism. I think, we can so see that parallel in the Bible of, love your enemies. And I think it's easy to see your competition in business as an enemy. But when you bring them in, really, and to find opportunity and to collaborate, and like you guys did in finding different niches where you can complement each other and send people each other's way, that's the idea with trade and with business and with economics, when applied biblically, that it's not a zero-sum game, right? It's not like for somebody to win, somebody else has to lose, that you can both win. And is that really kind of the all shall prosper? Will you maybe just go a little deeper on the all shall prosper concept that I hear you talk about a lot?
Yeah, so that became the slogan of our businesses ever since 1987. It was that all may prosper is the slogan for the Paladin Group of companies, and it's genuinely trying to make sure that the whole community prospers. If you just think of the Book of Ruth, it's an awesome book, and it's all about how Ruth, who was a Moabitess, became a Jew and all that kind of stuff. But the actual underlying philosophy behind that book is Boaz and what he did, the economic modeling that he used, and, allowing people to glean off what would otherwise be his profit. He wanted them to prosper. If he was the only one who prospered, where's Ruth going to buy her high heels? Because all the other businesses are going to go out of business. He'll centralize wealth. No one's going to make shoes and handbags for his bride. Okay, so he made sure that they could come and glean off his success, and he left so much in the paddocks, in the fields, that they not only had enough to eat, but they had plenty left over, which is the overflow, for their seed capital to run their own gig. And the region of Bethlehem, which is where this took place, was the only region that prospered in a 15-year international famine that wiped out whole civilizations across MENA region, Middle East and North Africa. Okay, so it's that logic that the Bible teaches us. We just miss it because humans are driven by greed. We're driven by self-preservation, and then greed, and the self-centeredness that I couple with it all the time is the power, the hunger for power. So it's power and wealth. And if we do that in the marketplace, you're wasting your time asking God for breakthrough. You're just praying for the wrong thing. You've got to pray for the understanding of God's economic modeling, which portrays profit-driven capitalism as directly from the devil. Okay, it's nothing to do with the Christian world. Applied biblical economics is holistic capitalism. People, profit, planet. Look after all your stakeholders. And we've got hundreds of stories of that, of how we made millionaires out of poor people, and how they learned why we did it and are doing it themselves. And that's all shall prosper. And that we put into a movement that we launched in 2023. We're waiting for the right time after COVID to launch the ASP movement, which is actually the movement to create the national vision of a sheep nation. We call it a just nation because we changed the terminology, so it's not Christianese, because we must bring the secular world with us. We'll never create a sheep nation just with Christians, especially because half of them don't know what they're doing. So if we bring the whole country with us, and push for slogans like universal prosperity and human flourishing and things like that, and show them how to do it with our proof of concept, our testimonies, these are the proof, to create a big company. Not all of us have to create big companies, but those of us that do, then we show them that the capitalism side of things, if you do it holistically, then the captains of industry, like those in the multi-billions, are going to share. It's all about taking greed and self-centeredness into caring and sharing. Nothing to do with socialism, just to do with biblical economics. When is enough enough? When have I got enough that I should be sharing with everybody else? And I shouldn't wait to share with everybody else, because if I do share with us, I'll get there quicker. Okay, so the ASP movement is growing all over the world. We launched it in California in 2023. We launched it again on the East Coast last year. August last year in Asheville with KCIA. So that's spreading on both coasts now. When I'm back next week in San Bernardino, we're doing refreshers. A lot of KI people are coming, and we're back on meetings to keep that growing in the US. But it's growing massively on Australia because we are a small population, massive country, small population, but very important country in the world, easy to reach a tipping point here so that the rest can look in, the big countries like the US, the EU can look in and say, wow, how did you do that? How did you get rid of homelessness, unemployment, inflation, even the toxic ideology undergirding climate change? How did you get rid of all of that? Well, come sit, let's talk. That's what it's all about.
How do you define a sheep nation? How do you know when you've gotten there in terms of creating the first sheep nation?
That's a good thing, because we look at it in Matthew 25, and again, we just see biblical principles, and we see, well, it's obvious, if someone's in jail, we should go and visit them. If someone's naked, we should give them some clothes. It's just about generosity. But it isn't. Generosity is just part of it. It's a strategic plan that Jesus was doing. Here's the thing, guys. If you understand the socio-economic circumstances of first century Palestine and what Jesus went through, what he lived through, and you'll find this all on the KI, the KI membership site. You can learn this stuff. But physically, what he lived through, then you can understand why he taught about sheep nations and things like that. So when the Lord showed me in 2011 that he's never had a sheep nation on earth. Solomon tried, as I said earlier, but he messed it up at the end. He nearly got there. Lust, at the end, identifying with the cultures of his wives instead of the culture of the kingdom. But the point being that he showed me this in 2011, and we do a thing called a spiritual due diligence. Okay, again, that's all on our website. I do a spiritual due diligence. Lord, why me? Who am I? Just the Gideon story. Who am I to do this? Like, I don't even have a degree. I don't have a tertiary. Why? And the Lord showed me why me. And then I said, so why Australia? And he showed me why Australia. So important. All the rest, all the things, but small population, reach a tipping point, prototype, everything. Okay, so all of the above. And then he said to me, now you have 2 years to learn this. You must identify what it looks like in the modern world so that you can then bring the world into it. It can't be allegorical myth from the Old Testament, transported into the New Testament. You must understand why Jesus said it, what was in his head when he said that in Matthew 25, what was going on around him. So I had to study first century Palestine. I'd already been studying the history of the Bible, around the Bible, since 1987 because I couldn't figure it out. So my genre of teaching is all based on understanding the circumstances surrounding everything that was going on geopolitically all around the countries where the scripture was coming from. I wanted to know what got in the head of the author of the scripture. Yes, we can take moral stories out of it and everything, but what was actually in his head or her head? What did they say? Why? Once you do that, then suddenly you realize, wow, look at this theme running through the Bible. And once I realized that, I could then extrapolate that into what is a modern day sheep nation. What does it look like? And it's a group of people, because it was the word in those days was ethnos, ethnic groups. Now we've got geopolitical boundaries. Okay, so nations as we understand them today. We have to have universal prosperity and flourishing. Shalom. The word shalom is not just the absence of war. Okay, it's such a place of peace and in your world and in your estate, meaning the house of Hodgson and so on, to such an extent that you just feel compelled to give back. Okay, not rip everybody off for your own personal gain. It's totally the opposite of the Babylonian economics. So what does that look like then? What have we got to do to turn that to turn the poverty we see in our nation, even this first world country, the 12th economy on earth, even yours, San Francisco, it's a basket case when you walk down the street there at night. Okay, it's a disgrace. It's not a sheep nation. Well, that shouldn't happen. And if we did business God's way, according to capitalism, that wouldn't happen. Okay, so therefore we set out what a modern day sheep nation would look like in terms of, okay, how are we going to get rid of poverty? How are we going to get rid of unemployment? And we put strategies together to do that. And we issued a white paper on that. How to eliminate unemployment in one day in your city with a 6-month build-up, and then in one day everybody does what we advocated for the 6 months, and it works. Okay, and the prosperity that comes out of it is astounding, and the crime rate drops, the suicide rate drops, everything drops. It's all on the KI teaching. If you learn that stuff, it'll help you so much with the degrees that you're doing through Zack and Coach Tam and so on, because it's the background. If you knew what Jesus saw, what he actually witnessed, over 2,000 men being crucified in one day outside the city of Sepphoris. He was 10 years old when he watched that. Yeah. It's unbelievable. And so that's why he went, that's what he grew up with. That's why he had such a strategy, to change the culture in his day. Gentle Jesus, meek and mild is for Sunday school. It was a war zone, guys.
Yeah, it's so much of your kingdom come, God's kingdom come to the nations, come to our families, and the transformation that happens, and the shift in cultures and practices, and even the just from the families to the institutions to the governments. Yeah, no, I love that. Love your mission. So one of the things, Dave, that I can see why this is a practice for you, but one of the things that you teach and talk about is about raising your levels of intimacy with the Lord. And you take off a day every week to go and pray. Will you talk a little bit about that and why and how that came about?
Yes. I'm a thick-skinned sort of dude. I don't pay attention properly, and I actually had to my pastor sent me on a course to go and learn to listen. I was a leader in the SAS, and in the Scouts I was a commander and so on, and I didn't need to listen. I gave orders, and that's how I thought life was. But anyway, one day I was having breakfast with my pastor. He likes to have breakfast with us to see how we are and how we're going. And he said to me one day, this is many years ago, about 2003, and he said, Dave, that business of yours, that Paladin, it's growing pretty big. How much quality time do you actually spend with the Lord? And so I said, Dan, I get up at 4 a.m. My body wakes up at 4, so I'll go and pray for an hour. I go to the gym, then I come back, and at 5, I'll go and pray for an hour. So, that's every day. And he said, no, I'm talking quality time. I said, Dan, who else in your church gets up that early to go and pray? He said, no, don't worry about them. I'm just talking about you. And he said, you really need to take a whole day to go and pray because of where you're going. This company, you're going to come under attack and all this sort of stuff. You need to hear from the Lord. And I said, I just wanted to get him off my back. I said, yeah, okay. But I had no intention of taking a day off at all. Anyway, the next thing, about 2 weeks later, Pastor Dan and myself are having lunch with Pastor Doug. And Doug is running the biggest church here in our city, but he's also running the biggest car dealership. So he's a priest king, I would say. And so he knows, my mind was listening to Dan have a day off and thinking, okay, Dan, you're pastor, you're living in this isolated world. It's not the real world and all that sort of stuff. Nah, I was wrong. Dan's a wise dude, and he was an engineer before he became a pastor. But either way, here I'm now having lunch with these two now. Pastor Doug has got a big piece of land that my church wants to buy to build our church, which is why I introduced the two of them. And I know them both. Obviously, Dan I know well, been in his church for 20 years. And I know Pastor Doug. We were having coffee with a group of people every Saturday morning, and Doug was one of them. So I introduced them. Anyway, we're chatting away, and Doug's asking me, hey, Dave, how's Paladin going? And so on. So I explained, and he said, geez, that's getting pretty big now, because by then we had about 15 or 18 companies. And he said, it's getting pretty big. How much quality time are you spending with the Lord? And Dan started laughing. I said, Dan, what's funny? And I said, you two know each other. You've been talking behind my back. And Doug said, what are you talking about? So Dan explained that he'd asked me the same question 2 weeks earlier. So Doug said, I thoroughly agree, Dave. You better take a day off to go and pray. You need to hear from the Lord. So I thought, this is now coming from a guy who's actually in business. Anyway, a couple of Sundays later, we're driving to church with my wife, and I'm talking to her. I'm saying, this is what these two pastors have said. They're both senior pastors, and they want me to take a day off from work. And I said, that's impractical. Why am I going to do that? And she said, well, don't you think you should listen to pastors? Isn't that one confirming the other? And they're not small little pastors. These are big shots. I said, no, but they don't, I don't know. Anyway, I get to church now. It's Anzac Day, which is where we commemorate the war history of Australia. And we got this retired general coming to talk at the church. And because I'm ex-military, the pastor asked me to do an intro for him. And so I got up to do the intro, and I told some weak joke, and I saw this guy at the back there glaring at me, and I thought, I'm upset, this old fossil, he's going to come and shout at me afterwards. Anyway, I did the intro, and went and sat down afterwards. Sure enough, he just took a beeline straight up to me, and he looked at me, and he said, I've got a word for you. Will you accept it? And I looked at him thinking, who's this guy? I get all these funny people giving me words and stuff. And he said, I can see what you're thinking. And he said, but you can ask him and him. I'm one of the founding fathers of Christian Outreach Center and a whole movement, which is a worldwide movement. I said, oh, okay, yeah, go ahead, sir. And he stuck his finger right on my nose, and he said, you are in the middle of deciding on making a decision on how to be intimate with the Lord.
Mm.
He said, you better make the right decision. Like a general, you better make the right decision. Turned and walked away. And my wife is sitting next to me, just nodding like this. I just thought, shut up. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. So that was when I started taking a whole day, every Wednesday, to go and pray. And didn't work at first, people walking past. I bought a kayak, went on the ocean, the ocean gets wild, tip over, lose my Bible. But eventually I realized I had to go far away from signal. And I bought a jet ski. That's my excuse. So I could drive up to the lakes, go across the lakes, go right off into the bush where there's no signal. I can just be with the Lord. I love the creation. I love the bush. And then be with the Lord and set up my camp, sit down and pray. But I'm praying. I'm not rakashanga screaming from the branches and the trees like a Pentecostal, even though I am a Pentecostal. It's more a case of, Lord, what is your will for me? What am I supposed to do? I've got to form a sheep nation. What is this? What does that look like? And here, ultimately, we ended up in the White House talking to the Treasurer of the United States, knowing ahead, invited by Mike Pence to do this. What am I going to say to the Treasurer, Lord? Well, that's how I heard from the Lord. They're getting so intimate after a whole day of sitting quietly, listening and waiting on the Lord and following themes that he gives me through the Bible, understanding and coming home saturated with the word, but fully understanding what I've got to do next. And that is how we came to be where we are now. That is the key, guys. You get your assignment, you're going to need information, and you better be intimate to get the right information. It's so easy to be led off your assignment by the devil. He does not want you doing your assignment. Intimacy is the key.
Yeah. Yeah. Such a good word. Such a truth that we need to hear again and again. And love that example that you're setting. I love the way that you've been a forerunner for us who, want to do things for the Lord, who want to be kings and priests and want to make an impact and advance the kingdom. And the way that you've faced adversity, right? And the adversity is big when the assignment is big, and the way that you've needed to create bigger than usual space for intimacy is such a powerful example. I love the holistic capitalism and adding in all the stakeholders and seeing how it all shall prosper. There's so much stuff that we can glean from just the talk we've had already, but I want to ask you to just maybe take another couple minutes to just speak to our audience and our students here who are maybe in their first few years in business and are in some of the growing stages, the growing pains of that seed just like beginning to take root. What advice do you have for the startup, first time entrepreneurs in their first decade in business?
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to prefix this with something that might surprise you, but I'm actually not a very good business person. I'm not, a good CEO that structures the business properly and things like that. I'm a good entrepreneur, and I can spot a deal, and I can make the deal work, and I can lead. I'm a natural leader. I can lead people in a vision and so on. But when it comes to the actual management of business and all the rest of it, I'm not that good at that. But what I can tell you, having said that, is the first thing that I do now. We're running 33 companies. We are condensing that down because it's off the planet. But the first thing that I would suggest to anybody starting a business is why. What establish the why? Is this business my vocation? Is this business my assignment? Because sometimes business and your vocation and your assignment are the same thing. That's not all that common. But my good friend Wes Hone, for example, he's a business coach and he's built a big coaching business, kind of like Coach Tam, I guess. I don't know her well enough, but certainly Wes, his assignment is to build up 1,000, which I think has gone up to about 10,000 kingdom operators through a coaching business. Okay, or is your business a tool like my business? Paladin Corporation is not my assignment and it's not my vocation. Okay, I suppose it is my vocation because that's what I do, but my assignment is to create the world's better sheep nation, and that's a teaching process and a leading process and developing strategies and actually executing and improving them. So if I was starting up a business, I'll be saying, why, Lord? I would do a spiritual due diligence. Okay, we don't have time to talk about that now because there's about 5 minutes left. But if you go onto the website, the KR membership site, you'll learn how to do a spiritual DD, and it'll blow you away. But the point is, if you did a spiritual DD, you would look at the business and you would say, Lord, what is the why? And once you get your answer, then you know how big it's got to be. You know whether it's got to be a passive income. You know if you're going to be hands-on or hands-off. There's so much to understand about the why, which directs your whole business. Okay, the only then can you start looking at the fundamentals and do up a business plan and a projection of your cash flows and so on. I've had so many people that have come to me. The Lord has stood them down, physically shut down the cash flow. He did that to me 20 years ago, 25 years ago now. The point is, he stood them down because they've built their business, but they're not using it the way he wanted them. They never did the spiritual DD to start off with, to understand, why is this business here? You know, it's pretty obvious why Trump's a billionaire. It's pretty obvious why we have a $5 billion company. I've got to influence governments. I've got to influence world leaders. I've got to influence the marketplace. But I wouldn't do it normally. I don't want the damn thing. It's too much work. I'd much rather have a jet ski ministry teaching people how to jump waves. You know, it'd be a whole lot easier for me. So at the end of the day, guys, it's very much establishing the why, then do your spiritual DD, then build in the fundamentals. And because we've got so little time, I probably can't elaborate much more. But go to the website, you'll see it all.
Yeah. And I've got a special link to share with you guys. So let's pivot to this, Dave, because you've really introduced us to a lot. You've scratched the surface on a lot, and there's been a lot of meat in just that. And we're so grateful for what you've contributed to the double degree program that we have with Vision International University and having you as a teacher. But tell us about Kingdom Initiatives. And I'm going to drop this link in the chat for our live audience. As we talk about this, I'll pull up something where you can scan a QR code for everybody on the podcast. But tell us about Kingdom Initiatives, what's going on, and how people can get involved.
Yeah, Kingdom Initiatives, or KI, just started out as a small internal church business ministry, local church business ministry, which my pastor asked me to build simply because there wasn't one in our church. Church was financially distressed, and I was the one funding it. And he just said, literally, he said to me one day, "You're going to die one day, Dave, and who's going to fund the church when you're dead?" Yeah, thanks, Pastor. But anyway, I formed that one. But because of the genre of teaching, okay, only that, the Lord had a plan. I didn't have a plan. I don't like public speaking. I'm not scared of it. I just don't like being a center of attention. Comes from the SAS training, I suppose. But still, point being, I taught a new genre of ministry that nobody was really teaching. And as I said earlier, it was from the head of the author of the scripture with a biblical historical background, interpreting it that way. And because of that, it grew to the extent that we couldn't fit everybody in the church on a Thursday night. So we had to open up in different churches around the place, and eventually then internationally. And the Lord grew it organically, not because I drove it, because I never ever drove it. But because of that, it became so big that in 2017, I think I did 90-something overseas trips from Australia. And from Australia, overseas, everywhere is far. All right. So I was had it by the end of the year. So we decided we better build a website and stop the traveling. And so we did. That all cost money. There's staff to manage and so on. So we were selling the memberships for $20 a month just to cover all the costs. But the point is, on that, we filmed a lot of the lectures that we'd learned over the years or lectured on over the years. Now people could join and they could just study it in their own time and so on. So such things as first century Palestine that I spoke about earlier, I don't know how you can be in business not understanding that, because it just changes your whole world, okay? So that one, you're finding your assignment, spiritual due diligence, spiritual covering, so vital, so vital. I can't talk about it enough. Being equally yoked in business has nothing to do with equal faith, guys, okay? So learn that. It's a big, big deal. The transfer of wealth from the wicked to the righteous, not to the Christians, because the Christians are mostly, well, not mostly, but a lot of them are capitalists, and it's crooked. Okay, God's provision, the three concentric circles of God's progressive provision, so important to understand that, and then you'll learn why. How do you get that into that outer circle of supernatural overflow, a supernatural multiplication? Why am I stuck in this middle circle of survival, or the next circle, of just a bit of overflow? I need to be in this big one of supernatural multiplication. All of that stuff is on there. I mentioned Megaref earlier, and so on. Okay, so all of those things are on that website as lessons, as videos, and then there's all the podcasts we've done over the years. It would help you in that degree that you guys are doing with Tamara and so on, but also it'll help your business to grow and multiply, and also to find out how big to build it and why and all that sort of stuff. It'll equip you to defend your faith in the secular world sensibly, not just thus saith the Lord or Genesis said that or Isaiah said that. It's, guys, if you don't do this, this is what happens. But if you do this, look, and it's biblical economics. And I argue that I lecture at secular unis all over the world. Okay, literally, UCLA, you name it, I lecture there at the economics degrees, and I'm just Dave. I don't have a degree, but what I teach works and I can prove it. And what they teach doesn't work and I can prove that. Okay. So that's all taught on the KI website, and it's growing and so on.
Yeah, I love it, Dave. I am going to go sign up myself. I'll tell you that right now. So I dropped the link in the chat for everybody who's here with us live and everybody watching on the podcast or listening. We'll add the link into the show notes, and I just pulled it up on the screen here. So if you've got your phone, you can scan the QR code. You can jump there. Dave, you did something special just for our KBA, Kingdom Builders Academy listeners and students, bringing it down 25%. So just $15 a month to get in there, get into some of this stuff. I want to go, I'm going to start with that first century Palestine, Dave. That's what's got my attention right now.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good one. Thanks. We've never done a discount because we just thought $20 is cheap. But I know that you guys are really committed to studying all the double degrees. I mean, I admire anyone who's got a degree. I never went to tertiary uni or anything. I tried as an adult, but didn't work. So I really admire people. And I said to the board, we've got to drop this, and we just need people to study it and undergird. You know what, guys, just quickly here. We're the tide is turning, as you would have picked, obviously. Trump is a great example of that. He's gathered a lot of business people around him. And the big deal is he can do a lot for the kingdom of God. But if they don't learn to occupy culture properly, and Christians don't know how to do it, and nor do politicians, no one seems to know it properly. If they do not occupy culture, and if they do not win the hearts and minds of their adversaries by providing solutions for those adversaries without compromising our values, they will lose the next election, or they will ultimately lose the following election, and it'll swing back. Okay? The Lord wants us to occupy culture, and that you can learn all of that on that website. It's so important that when you go into your double degree, that you go in with a background of, we have got to occupy culture, and we will never do it through adversity. We must do it through unity, and that means bringing everybody to believe our values, okay? And we can only do that by providing solutions for their problems, and that's what we do in business. All right, that's a summary.
Yeah. Absolutely. Good stuff today, Dave. I'm going to bring this back up. We've got some people asking for the QR code. So go ahead and scan that, or you can click the link. But Dave, this has been so powerful. It's been a great appetizer for being together in person next week for those of us who are going to be there in California with you. That's going to be a ton of fun. So thank you for coming on to the Kingdom Builders Academy podcast, for joining us and our students live. It's been an absolute blessing for us, and just so much to digest and then go out and apply.
Hi, this is Tamara Lowe, founder of Kingdom Builders Academy, here with a free gift for you, our loyal podcast listeners. We're giving away free copies of my newest book, Business Plus Ministry Equals Success, a superior model to profitably change your world. You can download your free copy right now at kbabook.com. That's kbabook.com. Thanks for tuning in to the Kingdom Builders Academy podcast today. Join us again for our next exciting episode.